Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. And my guest today is Andi Clark. And we're talking about what she really says in a great term is 9/11 lifestyle. And that encompasses, number one, who we are as a family. We are fire, we are rescue, we are law enforcement, we are EMS. And as many of you know, because of what's happening on our highways and byways when we respond to um, emergencies on active roadways, and we've all seen how many times apparatus or, God forbid, but people have been struck, injured, and killed on these scenes. We are a family. We are all first responders, and we have to include our dispatchers in that as well, because they're the first ones. They are really the first responder when somebody dials that 911 number or whatever the emergency number is. They're the first ones to answer that call, find out what the problem is, and send us on our way. So Andi Clark is known online as the elite trainer for police and first responders and creator of her signature program, 9/11 Elite Performance. She's the wife of a police officer, an expert in peak performance and how stress physically affects our bodies. She is known for her ability to reverse and prevent burnout in first responders, then help them regain their athletic conditioning so they can thrive throughout their career, online and offline, as well as her refreshingly relatable and no BS approach. Life wasn't always as burnout free for Andi. She has a genetic stress condition that puts her body into an increased stress response state all the time. Similar to what police officers and first responders experience when they put on their uniform and mentally prepare for whatever may happen in their day. And we just never know what's going to happen. It took Andi over 20 years with two very big burnout crashes, one while she was expecting, to figure out why her doctors, specialists, and the prescriptions given to her were not able to help. And that was what was happening to her, was not a mental health issue. Through her recovery, she formulated a completely different way to look at and handle burnout. Once she realized that her husband was thriving while his colleagues were still struggling with the same symptoms she had experienced, she knew that she couldn't keep her findings to herself. They needed the help. She could provide it. And 9/11 Lifestyle was born and now speaks and coaches officers and first responders all over the world. Andi, welcome to Five Alarm Task Force. It's a pleasure and honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the bio really tells us that this wasn't just something you thought up while cleaning the dishes and dusting the house. You're so close to that first responder state in your own home, as many of our spouses have been and still are over the years, that we add this to the defect you were born with. This really put a really tight squeeze on you personally.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I had symptoms my whole life of stress. So I like my first burnout crash was way before I'd even met my husband. And trying to just push through every single day where you wake up and you're so exhausted, no matter how long you slept, or if I struggled to sleep, I always woke up exhausted where I just pushed through my day. But being athletic and somebody who was type A, which pretty much every first responder is as well,
Right.
we push ourselves, and I just pushed through, and it just became my normal. When I became a police spouse and having kids and dealing with all the things that does go along in our house, where you always have a plan B, where, I never knew if my husband was going to be there or not. A lot of solo parenting, that definitely pushed me over the edge then as well.
Right. In general, how have you seen your husband doing even before you started this program that you created? How is he doing just as a law enforcement officer every day, going out and doing his job?
From a burnout
Right.
perspective, he could sleep forever. I would go in and be like, it's been more than 8 hours, get your butt up. And I would get really frustrated with him because it would take him almost an hour to get downstairs. And I'd be mad because I was like, okay, I usually have the kids and I don't have these options or these luxuries to do that. But as I learned more about burnout, I was learning that he he wasn't recovered. He couldn't even get going. He didn't have enough gas or battery in his tank at all to get going. And then he was always plagued with injuries. So struggling to play sports. He wasn't working out anymore. He was starting to gain weight. Getting short as well with us at home, especially after a longer block of shifts. So now that I look back and I see all the signs, I'm like, oh yeah, they were there. Yeah.
Okay. So that's very telling in and of itself. And so basically the two of you were actually suffering at the same time without
Yeah.
knowing what you were specifically suffering from.
No, and the thing is that you get those anger. So we named my anger Medusa. My husband didn't know if he was walking into the room, if he smiled at me the wrong way, if I'd be pissed, or we would just be fine. And getting short with the kids out of nowhere, like that wasn't my personality. It wasn't him. He's very calm, very calm person. But after long blocks of shifts, he'd be shorter with the kids, not able to manage things. And that would takes a toll on the relationship when you don't realize that these are things that are actually out of your control, that the shame hits, the pride hits, the ego
Yeah.
hits, all of those things hit. And it's not necessarily that these things are even in your control.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the E word. I was asked a couple of years ago to teach at a local fire conference, and I've been a lifelong teacher and educator, but I hadn't spoken to a class specifically of adults for anything in the fire service for probably 30 years. And my friend who was pushing me on, cajoling me into teaching at the conference, said, well, you're passionate about something, make that what you teach about. And I was passionate about firefighter health and wellness and the cancer initiative and behavioral health initiative. So I created a course called The Elephant in the Firehouse, when ego gets in the way of passion.
Yeah.
And the toll that takes. And it starts simply with what was burning 50 years ago. You know, I've been out since 85 because of an injury. So I've just kept the fire service close to me. But how things have changed, what's combusting now, it's so different from what it was back in the 70s and 80s. The carcinogenic levels that we face at every fire, from a wastebasket to a dumpster to a factory, etc. And I think that you put all that together and the challenges that we face, the things that we see. We were just talking to my wife last night about the fact that, you know, we see things that we would never want anybody else to ever have to see. And we do things that we would not even ask anybody else to do. And if we don't have our personal cadre with us, we have no way of letting that out. And I'm one way I'm lucky, besides my wonderful wife, almost 48 years together. But the night that I was voted into our fire department, I met a young man. He was 18 years old. He'd been dropped off to go to college, and he really wasn't a college type. And he found this firehouse. I didn't know it was there. I found it one day when I was just going shopping, and I had visited firehouse all over Greater Boston, because I admired firefighters since I was 7, when a fire department had to come to the woods behind our home for a fire. And I went down to that truck, and the pump operator was really sweet, and he gave me a lollipop and showed me things. And I said, oh, they're great. I didn't want to be a firefighter. I had no desire to do it. I knew my path of life I wanted to do. And, but I met this young man, and we found out we were both Jewish, and we didn't know at the time that we were the first Jewish people to ever apply and get membership in this department. And I was the first college graduate to apply. And that young man and he's still my best friend today. We met in 77, and he's still my best friend today. He lives also in little north of us, 5 hours north of Florida. But we just talked yesterday. We talk 3 or 4 times a week. We're going to be spending some time with him up in July. And we were each other's mattressed walls, if you want to call it, in a padded room. We were each other's. And there are calls, like I said to somebody yesterday, there are calls that we still discuss especially if we're together, not as much on the phone, but when we're together, there are calls that we went on, because we went on a lot of calls together, because I live very closely. He spent a lot of time at the firehouse, and we often ran calls together. And thankfully, between having him to talk with all the time about that stuff, and my wife, because at first she couldn't understand the chief on the radio, so she didn't know what was going on in our calls because of his southern twang. But once I started talking about it and sharing it, she wasn't interested in listening to the radio, but she was interested in listening to the story and what we went through, and has been a wonderful partner and my cushion here, for what we've gone through, and she knows that we're still with the discovery now of PFAS and PFOS and our bunker gear going all the way back to 1977 when I started. We now know that there's still that little sort of Damocles hanging above my head. Yes, stuff that was burning then wasn't quite as chemically heavy as it is today, but the fact is that those chemicals were in our bunker gear that I was wearing during fighting fires inside structures. And we know now that those forever chemicals can be passed through the gear into us, leading to certain cancers. So we've gone through 2 scares. They've both come out negative. But I think one of the key things you just said is that if you don't have somebody right there that you can depend on, doesn't have to be your partner in the job. It can be anybody else that you can confide in and share with. Because if we try to keep it in all the time, it's like a balloon. You can blow up that balloon, and you can have a big balloon, but at some point, you can't put any more air or helium in that balloon, and it pops. Yeah. Well, the pop of a balloon makes a big noise. When we pop, it has a lot of collateral damage.
Yes.
So let's talk about the first issue, burnout on the job.
Yes. So the thing with burnout is, with a lot of the job, is that there's a lot of talk about the traumas, the trauma calls, and 100%, they're a big part of the job, and they're a big part of what you do. But it's the things quite often we don't think of that start building up a lot of burnout as well. So there's lots of different factors. Our stress system has not at all adapted since caveman days. So it doesn't know the difference between a hot priority trauma call or you're stressing over family guilt of not seeing your child or missing a graduation, or worrying about an admin stress, or the fact of normally being on a 24-hour shift and having OT or having to do doubles or triples. Like we have some guys that are doing like 72s, some even 96. It's crazy in a row.
This is in law enforcement and fire?
This is fire. Yeah, because law enforcement is usually 10, 12 hours. Yeah. They go into OT, but you get times. I mean, my husband last week, 2 weeks ago, on his day off, worked from 8 a.m. till 1 a.m. So, and that was his day off. So, they do get crazy shifts, but I know with police, then he's finishing at 1, but he would have to start his next shift at 7 a.m. And so you don't get your sleep. So we get these stressors of not sleep. It doesn't matter if it's a physical or a mental stressor. We also get into fire training. So with the fire guys, depending on the station you're at, some of them have really heavy training when they're not on calls. And that also can push your body. And then on top of that, in their side time, they're also doing workouts. And your body can't always tell the difference between all of these stressors. And if quite often we're looking at them from a civilian's perspective of always sleeping at the same time of night, waking in the same time of morning, all of these start going, and your stress system manages 50 different hormone responses. So you have your sleeping and waking, that circadian rhythm, and that is kind of what runs the stress and what runs the rest of these hormones going through your stress system through burnout. So it starts taxing different hormones in different people: cholesterol, blood pressure, healing and inflammation, gut issues, thyroid, testosterone, estrogen, sleeping, waking, like everything, allergies, all different things. So it hits different people, gallbladder, liver. So it hits different guys at different rates and different symptoms. So they don't always know where it's at. And it starts affecting one of the hormones does moods as well. So sometimes that short fuse is coming from a hormone, not necessarily from a buildup of traumas. So it's not always the mental. A lot of times it's the physical in the body. So all of these things build up. And if we're not making sure that your stress system is strong and supported to that of what you guys need in fire, EMS, what you guys need for 24-hour shifts, for everything that's thrown at you. If we're not checking and making sure that your toxin levels are on track, I mean, some of the toxin levels we get in our fire guys are through the roof, but they're different toxins for different guys. So it's different areas as well. When you're not sleeping at night, when you sleep at night, that's when your body detoxifies.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to always make sure that we are doing regular checks to make sure that your detoxification pathways are fine. So I'm talking detoxing lactic acid from your workouts, from your training, detoxing just regular things in your body, detoxing some of the toxins that are the ability to get some of the toxins out that are coming in from being on scene of fires. All of these things, if you're just not sleeping at night, then your body is decreasing in its ability to do that. So we need to take those factors into account that you can't control and be able to do proper testing to figure out where in your body is your stress system taxed, and what do we need to do in your specific body to take that stress off and allow your body to optimally perform so that you're not in burnout, so that you're not burning out.
It's what my pain management doctor calls restorative sleep.
Yes.
We need restorative sleep. So if you have unless you can sleep a good, strong 7-8 hours where it's really restful sleep, mm-hmm. your body doesn't do that job that we and you wanted to do, is that to help kind of erase some of the crap that happened during the day and give us a clean slate, basically a clean slate to wake up in the morning. And I think that another stressor you can add to that are, especially in fire and EMS, are those people who train, and they have very few calls. Yeah. Or the next station got the big call and they're still there. And they say, what am I doing sitting here? I mean, we could have gone on that call. We could have helped. We could have, but they're not dispatched. And so they're in a slower station and they want to do, and it's like they're in jail. And so that builds up frustration as well. What did I join this for? I joined this to go on these calls and I'm not going anywhere and stuff like that. So I think you're bringing up a very valid point that I think is not often thought about by first responders.
Yeah. And the thing too is that we can't fix your sleep every single night. Even if you're at a slow station, there's always going to be that part of your brain in the back of your mind that is preparing in case a call comes. So there's ways that we can help get you into a better sleep at the station if your body is optimally trained, but it's still not going to be as good of a sleep as it will most likely be when you are off shift at home. But making sure that your body is ready to sleep when you're asking of it to sleep will make sure that when you are at home off shift, that you're able to restore as much as possible, detox as much as possible, repair your body, your muscles, your nervous system, which your nervous system is hit hard with PTSD and traumas. So if you're not sleeping and allowing your nervous system to be repairing as well, it just all becomes this whole vicious cycle.
Sure.
And so if we can do as much as we can to support that and make sure that your body is optimal so that when you can sleep, then you're able to, and you're able to restore.
One of the industries that has been making some strides towards that is the alerting, station alerting companies. I'm not sure you see it in Canada yet, but we have, as new stations are being built or these alerting systems are being put in, it's not just one gong going off in the entire firehouse, all the lights go on at the same time. They're doing selective. So if you have an EMS rescue, you're running a rescue out of your fire station, that room and those two people are notified. They're alerted, and the other ones, the alert doesn't go out to them. The lights don't go on in their bunks. They're able to sleep through. And at first I thought, that's just technology playing around with what we do. And then I started thinking about it more, and I said, because I also worked for EMS for about a year and a half when I was still a volunteer firefighter. And I realized that that would make a big difference, because there were two units, two crews at our bunk base, we called it. And if there was a call for one team, the whole house lit up. That was it. Everybody was. So you had to wake up, and it's 155 going out 153. Okay, I'm on 153 tonight. I don't have to go, but I'm still up now.
Yeah.
2:30 in the morning, I'm still up and say, okay, can I get back to sleep? And that's so now with selective alerting, that's cutting down on that. And hopefully, I don't know, I haven't done any research on it because I see it in the trades as I read through the trades and online, but I'm hoping that is having basically that same effect that you've just talked about, that we don't rouse all 12 people in the firehouse for a reported leg injury at 1:30 in the morning. We send that team out, they go, and everybody else basically is not undisturbed unless and until they have a call that would take the rest of the station. And it makes a lot of sense to me now.
It really does. I'm very curious to hear how it does work, because I hear some things from guys as well that even if an alarm never goes off, they struggle to sleep because they're worried they're going to sleep through a call if they fall asleep.
Yeah.
So there's those things at play as well. But if we kind of look at these guys like pro athletes, there's a pro athlete has all kinds of different coaches and all kinds of different remedies to help. So we look at this technology as being one part of the solution. And then as with pro athletes, they have mindset coaches, they have therapists, they have physiotherapists, nutrition trainers, all these things. So that's where somebody else can then come into place and start working at them in that environment and saying, okay, what is the reason now for you not sleeping? Let's see if we can get, all of your hormones aligned, all of these things aligned, see if that helps you get into a better sleep and not be as anxious, because anxiety also comes with gut issues.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Been there, done that. Yeah, know that.
Yeah. And the thing is that a lot of guys don't realize every time your stress system kicks in, so every time there's a call, you don't need to pee or poo and have a meal. So your digestion slows down, your colon slows down and starts causing a whole slew of gut issues. But 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in your gut. And serotonin is that happy, feel good, calm, I'm not anxious, I want to go and do things like hobbies and hang out with my family, and I have motivation and drive. It's that hormone. So when you start getting gut issues, that goes down, anxiety goes up, which then starts messing with their sleep as well. So having that technology in allows us to take out one factor, and then we can start finding out what are these other factors going in from different.
Right. Somebody told me that serotonin and adrenaline aren't compatible. They're like this. They don't fit in the same thing. And so when the bell goes off or the speaker goes off or the dispatch, the adrenaline kicks in.
Yeah.
And no matter how tired we were, how deep asleep we were, bam, we're gone. Problem is that at some point, sometimes if it's a long call, during that call, that adrenaline runs out. Yeah. Because you've gone to a different task on the emergency scene that's not as demanding. So your adrenaline runs out. That means all that energy you had built up starts running out, and you're trying to how do I keep going now at this point? And there's no room or place for the serotonin to come back in and give you that happy, relaxed feeling again. So you're stuck on this tightrope. You're out on the call, your adrenaline has waned already, and you're just going,
Yeah, and
what
there's
do I
different things
do?
that happen there. So one of them is that when your cortisol gets so low, it starts stealing testosterone. So we get situations where guys have low testosterone, and there's different causes of low testosterone. So when we have that low testosterone, it's like figuring out what the cause is. Is it because your cortisol has been stealing it? It's called the cortisol steal. There's pregnenolone steal. There's different stealing of hormones that happen when certain ones are rushing all the time. As well, your body also gets to that point with cortisol where if it's pushing it out so much, and then like, so a call that you go and you're not needed, you have all this cortisol pushing inside you, and eventually your body has to clean it up, and then you send more out and your body cleans it up. And this could be family guilt. It could be from an admin stress, things where you don't need that cortisol to even push through things. So over time, your brain stops and says, hey, you know what? We've been sending out all this cortisol and we keep slowing it down. Why are we sending out so much? So it just starts slowing down your natural cortisol output as well. And then we start hitting it with coffees, hitting it with energy drinks, and you push up your cortisol, and your brain's like, what have you just done again? I thought we turned this down. Let's turn it down more. So the coffee over time stops giving you that cortisol rush again. You need more and more. And sometimes it doesn't even give you a baseline anymore. It doesn't amp you at all when you get there. So it's really important as well for these guys to be learning how to kick themselves out of that stress state as soon as they realize that call's not for them. As soon as they realize, hey, I'm stressing over a family thing, I need to move myself back into my resting state and out of my stress state. So there's a lot of different tools we can teach them to start switching their nervous system from that stress nerve into the resting nerve.
Right. So before we take the first break, I want to get to another topic that's right, basically what you were talking about. Is the physical stress symptoms of sleep deprivation, short fuse, brain fog, gut issues we just talked about a little bit. And I think we need to do clear that up for some for viewers and listeners, because there are numbers of issues, a couple that you've mentioned, a couple that on the page that you provided to me, thankfully. And we're talking about also, we'll talk about before we take the break, if we can, physical stress and how you see it affecting PTSD. And we have to, basically say, as right from the start, you cannot be a first responder and not suffer some level of PTSD. It may not be what you've seen on television shows or news things with our brave men and women coming back from fighting on the front line, stuff like that. But we, as first responders, as we just said a few moments ago, we see things that we would not want other people to see. We have to do things that we would never ask anybody else to do. And that leaves an imprint in our memory. And it's how we're able to handle that imprint, or where we file it, in which folder in our hard drive up here, will result in how it could have an effect on us. So let's talk about a little bit more about these physical stress symptoms.
Yes.
Especially the sleep deprivation and short fuse and brain fog, because we've all been through that. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So there's 3 parts to your stress system. There's your hormones, there's your nervous system, and your gut. And they all are intertwined and they all play a part with one another. So when we're getting into sleep, the tired and wired feeling where you can't fall asleep, that is where your cortisol, which is your energy waking hormone, but it's also your stress hormone, is sitting in the frontal lobe of your brain. And it's not slowing down because it doesn't know when day is, when night is, when you're sleeping, when you're awake, when to do what. So you sit there and you have these revolving thoughts. So some people may have reoccurring thoughts, flashbacks. Some people could be thinking about changing the tires in their car, oil change, could be thinking about like just totally random things, but their brain won't stop. And it becomes this whole revolving thought of their to-do list and this and that, because their body still feels that they're supposed to be awake. And that means that your melatonin, your sleeping hormone, is not kicking in. So we need to start getting your hormones to start going into a regular rhythm. But because you guys are all over the map on your shifts, sometimes there's some supplementation that we can do. There's different testing that we can do to find out which hormones are off and help to give you certain supplementation based on the hormones in you that are off, to make sure that when you are falling asleep, you take the supplementation that will start increasing your natural melatonin and send a signal for the cortisol to go down. Some guys will do just regular melatonin, but if your melatonin doesn't know how to even read that signal, it's like, okay, it's sitting in here, I have no idea what to do with this melatonin right now. But there's other things you need to do to be able to get that cortisol down and get it regulated, so the cortisol leaves the frontal lobe of your brain and your melatonin can naturally kick in. When your melatonin naturally kicks in, then all of these other hormones start realigning themselves while you're sleeping. Also, when your stress system's going off all the time, blood sugars are thrown off, and that usually is what causes a lot of the waking mid-sleep. Not night terrors that are PTSD induced, but the waking mid-sleep where you wake up, toss and turn, can't get back to sleep, is another aspect of your stress system that is firing. So tired and wired, waking mid-sleep, we see tons, or we see where people could sleep forever. The thing in common is none of them are waking refreshed.
Right, right. And I've since '92, I've been suffering with pain-induced insomnia because of the back injury, and it runs in crazy cycles. And thankfully, the pain during the day is managed by an implant that I have, and that's a big help during the day. But for that to work, I have to wear a belt and an antenna, so that it communicates with the one inside me. And at night, but the thing is, though, that what that does is blocks the pain signal from getting to my brain. However, the body still knows that pain is there throughout the day.
Yeah.
And so when it runs out by around dinner time, a little after that, and I take it off, that whole wave of that pain and the fatigue caused by chronic pain kicks in. And so in the evening, I need to take the medications that I use. But still, I wind up I have to sleep. I sleep with 4 pillows, 2 for the head and 1 for each side of the body, because I have to align my body to keep my spine somewhat immobile and in line, so that I'm not pressing on the nerve that's damaged. And so few nights do I sleep like 7-8 hours nicely. They're few and far between, but I've find a rhythm that I can do. And in going to some of these conferences and talking with other firefighters online, I wouldn't wish my injury on anybody. And it's been 5 back surgeries, hundreds of injections, 3 implants altogether. But you have to understand that you don't have to have this kind of severe pain for it to affect your whole system. That's what I've learned, that even a muscle strain, which can easily be mended and healed if treated correctly, if you take the ego out of the picture and you treat that injury correctly. Smaller issues that with pain can be managed properly so that they don't have to affect your restorative sleep. And you have to, one of the things I finally found were 2 doctors who believed in restorative sleep and how important it is, and changed that medication to help me with that. Because other doctors said, well, just, make yourself tired, read a little bit, and go to sleep. Yes, there's with chronic pain, induced insomnia, there is no switch that just shut it off and say, okay, I'm fine now for the rest of the night. It doesn't work that way. And I think the same thing, you're saying the exact same thing. If we can't balance, if we can't work on ourselves to learn how to balance those hormones and what we can do to when we need the special hormones and what we can do when we don't need, we just want to be back to ourselves, regular humans, quiet humans. If we can't balance those, whatever the cause is, we're not going to be 100% into that being able to do our job and our job where we work and our job at home.
Yeah. And it's a big struggle when you can't get into that sleep and restore, because then things like small little, just a workout where, after a leg day on workout, or after doing some of your tactical training and your whole body feels like it's been hit by a truck, it can't heal. And that stems into bigger injuries and more injuries as well as you're going on, that may take you fully out without even having, or it may put you into a situation when you are on scene where you end up getting a bigger injury because your body wasn't healing in your sleep. I was reading some statistics, some research on sleep deprivation and all of the services, and just how it really does affect as well, just on the job, on scene, the decisions that you make, the judgment calls you make, the ability to be calm and rational as well, and to big picture think and that. And it was amazing reading all of these. I was reading them, police, fire, EMS, and one of them was saying that in the start of shifts was when, because people were trying to, like, the first start of their first block of shifts, if they had a big call, that's where quite often for police officers, that was where more use of force was used at the very first part of a shift, when they were still adjusting to be able to switch into that different stress state that they needed, when their body hadn't been able to sleep and repair itself before on their days off. There's so many studies on sleep deprivation and how it really, really affects your safety and your health on the job.
Amazing. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, folks. And when we come back, we're going to continue with Ian. We're going to talk about, now that we've defined this and we know what the problems are, how do we get our bodies back to peak performance with the effects of the job and a little bit more. So we're going to go deeper into this 9/11 lifestyle when we come back. If you're watching the video, folks, you're not going to see anything different happen. If you're listening to the audio, you're going to hear our few messages. And as always, we ask you to please stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back to this episode of 5 Alarm Task Force. My guest is Andi Clark. Her website is 911lifestyle.com. I urge you, suggest to you, hopefully request you to go to visit that site to learn more about what we're talking about today. Let's be honest. If you're a first responder, you know exactly what we're talking about today. I would doubt, unless you're just a brand new rookie, and you, as a rookie, you even go through your own emotional roller coaster. But if you've been a first responder for a year or more, you know what we're talking about today. We've all gone through it. We've all felt it. A lot of us don't want to admit it. And that adds to the problem because we don't want to face the issue. Like I said with my course, we let ego get in the way of passion. We let fear, well, if I take a day off because I hurt my ankle, maybe they'll make me take 3 days off and I can't go in, I got a shift, and and we put all that pressure on ourselves. Very few others in our job put the kind of pressure on that we put on ourselves to do our job as first responders. So, Andi, let's talk about how the test that your organization is able to do to work with first responders to find out that those balances of hormones and stuff aren't working correctly. And then we can get, after that, once you have that information, how do we get that first responder back to a peak level of performance?
Yeah, so it's not the same with every single person what's going on. And that's where I think a lot of us struggle as well. I know my personal story as well is I went to my doctor and telling them how exhausted I was, telling them how I was struggling to make it, how, my sleep was off and my gut. I had tests from my doctor for gut for over 20, I think it was 20 years of testing between colonoscopies and stool tests and all kinds of things. With my gut had always been like off,
Right.
right? But it wasn't ever in a disease state. So so it was a struggle. It was really interesting because once I figured out how to get out of this and I went to my doctor to get some blood testing done from them, and I sent them all the testing that I'd had done that showed what was actually going on in my gut and on in my hormones. And they said, I don't know how to read those tests, but let's go through all the tests that we have done with you. And they went through them. And I didn't actually remember all the tests I had done in the past. We had gone through them. And I was like, yep. And that colonoscopy turned negative, and that stool test was negative, and this one didn't show anything. And it was actually when I was in my doctor's office before figuring out what was going on, where she had tested my cortisol, and my cortisol was less than 10%. And she said that I was showing signs of Addison's disease. So Addison's disease is the lower 2.5% functioning of your cortisol. And it's basically where your organs are pretty much shutting down. You're hospitalized. You're in disease state. And she said, we're going to keep an eye on you. I'll send you to a specialist. So where I live, it was like 6 months to get into an endocrinologist to start figuring this out. And I was like, I'm showing signs of a disease. I'm like 10% functioning. This is crazy. It turns out though, after I figured out everything was going on, my cortisol wasn't even low. What was happening was, as I spoke earlier, was it was being stolen. So it was being stolen further up the pathway. So our hormones, I kind of describe them like a mountain. So we start off with our stress hormones with pregnenolone, and it splits and does 2 jobs, and then it splits and does more jobs. And every time it keeps splitting, it does different jobs. Well, testosterone is near the end, and so is cortisol. So if anything is happening further up, let's say there's a rock slide, or let's say that there is a mudslide and it actually opens up the pathway of one of those, more hormone might start flowing down one pathway and less down the other, which means as it's trickling down too, less is happening. So I did this testing, which called the Dutch test. It's a urine test. It's a 24-hour urine test that tests your whole hormonal pathways to figure out what is going on in your hormonal pathways. And that found out that, yeah, earlier on, my cortisol was going off. We find this with guys with testosterone. So we have a lot of guys that come to us with, they're on testosterone shots. Now, from what I just described to you, if the issue is actually happening further up in your pathway, then if I'm giving you a testosterone shot to fill down below, how is that fixing the problem that's further up? Right? So we find with the shot, it was created for a reason, and there definitely are places for it. But what we're finding is, I was blown away when we started getting guys coming in, and the majority were taking testosterone shots or creams. And then these shots don't fix the problem, and it starts making things worse. It starts throwing off the rest of their stress system. And what we find as well, so there's different reasons. Something up above could be going. It could be your cortisol is stealing it. It could be that the testosterone is moving into estrogen because of certain things happening in your pathways. We find this a lot in the guys too, but it's different. It depends on what is happening in you. So we need to find out what is happening in you in this whole pathway to find out, why is your testosterone off? Why is your cortisol off? Is it actually low? Mine wasn't. My doctor was saying I had like close to Addison's. They're sending me to a endocrinologist who, when I eventually did, just wanted to start pumping me up with cortisol. But my issue was further up as well. So that would have really messed me up. So there's this side between where we 100% need our doctors for this crisis. I mean, EMS, you guys, you're doing crisis medicine all the time. There's 100% a purpose for it. But if we start looking at all of the markers on testing for disease standards, and we start looking at them from that aspect, then we're going to be missing the proactive preventative side of the functional medicine. So there's different testing as well for that. So there's different gut testing. There's 4 different gut tests that we offer in our program based on people's symptoms. It really depends on the symptoms, would be depending on which one we would suggest. We have another test as well that we do that tests your, so your stress system flies through vitamins and minerals more than you can eat in food. And there's a lot of guys that just start throwing all these supplements at themselves, but we don't know if your body actually needs those. And the ratios are really important as well. If the ratios are off, so if you're throwing certain supplements at yourself and it's one your body does not need, then you're actually throwing other things off. So there's a test that we can do to find out if your vitamins and minerals for your adrenals and your thyroid are getting what they need, getting too much of something, if the ratios are off. And that same test tests our heavy metal toxins, which has been fascinating. So we're getting some officers showing with high lead levels that are on tactical teams that are doing a lot of shooting practice because high level of lead in guns.
Right.
We're getting we just had a fire guy, his arsenic was off the charts of the testing.
Wow.
There's and he's fire investigator that goes after, like, so he's in these fires after
Right.
them, so he's exposed differently once the fire has is
Mostly out,
yes,
but
exactly, right, there's
but you'll
still
still
the
see those little wisps, stuff like that. And that's why, we are pushing that they should be wearing protective breathing apparatus when they go in. Yes, it's a little bit cumbersome
yes
to do a fire investigation because I was an inspector when I couldn't do active calls, so they gave me an inspector's position for a year, and I didn't wear breathing apparatus. But there were times that you had to go in and you had to look through it, and there was still that warmth, that smell, and stuff in the air. Now, that was in '85. Here we are in 2021, and we know it's not just the aroma of what was burning that's floating around in that air. So I'm not surprised to hear that he had, his level was really off because he was in there doing those investigations, and stuff was still, as we say, was still cooking a little bit in those rooms.
And we also think too, this is a guy as well with major gut issues. His detox pathways were off. Vitamin D levels were low. So the thing is that definitely lead, some of the other toxins are actually stored in your bone.
Mm-hmm.
So doing blood tests for them doesn't tell you, it tells you what your immediate exposure was, but it doesn't tell you what your long-term exposure was. So the testing that we do helps with what is your long-term, like your actual, what you're carrying in your body, not just the what you were just recently exposed to.
Right.
So that's where sometimes like blood is really good for us finding out vitamin D levels. When you're not sleeping at night, your D level's lower, and your D is needed for detoxifying. Your D is also, when you're low in D, you actually start leaching calcium, which pulls also out the sometimes lead into your body, which then starts taxing your kidney and liver. Like there's so many different parts to be looking at all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to find out what in each specific person it is. The one we do always give everybody, like as soon as they join, it's included in our program, are the 2 I just mentioned. The Dutch test that we do and the other test that we do for finding out your vitamins, minerals of your adrenals and thyroid, making sure they're just being fed. Because if we can instantly give you what your adrenals, your stress system, and your thyroid need from a nutritional perspective right now, we're able to already just give them some more strength. And
I'm going to ask you a key question.
Mm-hmm.
You're in Toronto.
Yep.
I'm in South Florida. We
Yep.
have first responders listening to us all over both countries and across the world. We've got listeners in at least 40 countries.
Mhm.
And so can a first responder who's listening to this and feeling these symptoms is interested, are they able to work with you online?
Yep. Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay.
That was the struggle I started. So when I started this, so my background is as 27 years of a nutrition and personal training coach, background massage therapy, all the nerves, the muscles, all of that. And so when I got into this, I was like, okay, I need a practitioner that can do all these other things that are out of my scope of practice. And it was hard because there's so many rules and regs and laws with certain functional practitioners as to where they can work, where they can't. And then, so it was being able to first find somebody that had all of the qualifications that I need, that really, really, really understood all aspects of the stress system, understood the toxins, understood the hormones, understood the gut and how they all play a part, but then understood your life. And so I eventually found somebody who she trains athletes and herself. Like she's done, I don't know how many Ironmans. She ran the Boston Marathon 3 times. She ran multiple marathons, like all this stuff. Like, so she's used to pushing to the max. She also, the same as me, has some genetic SNPs in hers that also change how her stress system works. So when you go even into the genetic aspect of things, for me, we found out one of my genetic variants is that my body doesn't methylate properly, which means how all of the cells in my body are regenerating themselves all the time. So after you work out, after you push yourself, after you're taxed, all of these things, your body's always regenerating, and mine couldn't, which depletes my glutathione, which is what helps with your mitochondria. So finding that out, I'm like, oh, I need to supplement daily with glutathione. Since I've been doing that, I can now kick butt and workouts again. I couldn't before. So finding out, okay, are there genetic SNPs in you? Do you have toxin overload? Where are your hormones balancing? There's also another test that she offers as well, which is an organic acid testing, which I kind of relate to being an emissions test in the car. So finding out, how are you eliminating things, which helps us with your detox pathways, helps us with mold and other some other co-infections in the body. That test for me was interesting because it found out that my body also doesn't absorb vitamin B very well, which is one of your vitamins that helps your stress system. So I know that I personally need to take extra vitamin Bs in different forms for my body to be able to absorb them. Like, it's so specific to each of our bodies that we need to really understand. It's not just like, hey, Joe's taking this supplement, it's working for him, let me take it. It's really understanding what supplements does your body need, what vitamins, minerals does your body need, what toxins do we need to get out, how is your detox pathways working, which that oats test too helps us understand your detox pathways and where we need to be working on yours. Which, when I'm saying detox pathways, we have to understand that's very different than doing a detox.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
those over-the-counter detoxes are very different. We're talking on just getting your system working so that it can get rid of lactic acid. It can get rid of just all the toxins that your body just builds up on a regular day-to-day basis of what it's supposed to do just to keep you healthy. So there's so many different testings, but testosterone is off in every guy, but the reasons are so different, and we have to really find out the reasons.
Yeah, I just had mine done the last labs I did last month, and I was, I was thinking, well, maybe that is my testosterone's part of it. So the cardiologist said to me, he says, why don't you have your primary at the next labs do a testosterone test and see, and a vitamin B test. So I said, okay. So we did. They were both in normal ranges. So while that was good to see, it didn't answer my questions that I had personally. So I'm going to tell you, for me personally, this is very, very interesting, because during the break, you and I discussed my situation. And, I think, even though I'm not an active first responder anymore, because of what I've gone through the last 6 months, this might be a good way to find out, since nobody else has any answers for me so far.
stress is stress. So, and this is the thing we don't think of is we see, so usually when I'm first starting to talk to somebody, if they're coming into the program, we go through like, where's your sleep? Where's your gut? Where's this? And I'll ask, how long's that been? How long's this been? And if there's a time, like, let's say 5 years ago is when all the gut issues started, when the snoring, the sleep apnea, all of these things started, right? And I'll be like, what happened then? It could have been a promotion. It could have been having kids. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to have been a trauma. It may have been, absolutely. But quite often there was something that happened along that time when the stress system got completely overloaded, hormones, nervous system got completely off. We get as well like stomach acid issues. The amount of guys that come to us with either antacid use or on proton pump inhibitors prescribed by their doctor, and none of them, not one in our program has tested high for stomach acid, not one.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, is that when your nervous system kicks in, when you're in a stress state, nervous system kicks in and your gut shuts down. So as I said earlier, you don't need to eat. So your stomach acids slow down. When your stomach acids slow down, the opportunistic bacteria kick in, the bad bacteria, and they start taking over and wreaking havoc. That high stomach acid and bad bacteria can have the same indigestion feelings, the same feeling of coming up and all that gross stuff. And so we haven't yet heard of a doctor that's put anybody on antacids or PPIs who has ever tested the client first for stomach acid. High stomach acid, wow. Which is so simple. If you Google right now, baking soda challenge, I do need to say, anybody that's going to do this, if you are on a PPI, or if you are taking stomach antacids for a long period, do not do this test. But if you aren't, go and do the test. It's easy. It's something like, I'm going to say the wrong ratios, half a cup of water or a quarter cup of water to a quarter of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of baking soda. Make sure that it's fresh baking soda and not one that's been sitting in a fridge for a while. But if you do that on an empty stomach as soon as you wake up, and see if in 5 minutes you have some 2 to 5 really good solid burps. If you do, your stomach acids are good. If not, you've got low stomach acid.
Wow.
And what guy doesn't want to do a burp test?
Exactly. Yeah.
My kids love it.
Come on, kids. Come on. Listen. Here goes Dad. He's gonna belch.
But that starts creating this whole slew of gut issues, which decreases your serotonin. Also, all of these hormones, a lot of them are distributed through your gut. So if your gut is off, even if your hormones are working, that's not going to work. So it's this whole combination between hormones, nervous system, and gut.
Wow. I just can't imagine anybody else really on a day-by-day basis would figure this out, how complex it is. And again, even most of our medical professionals who are dedicated to the task, but they have their own specialties, and that's what they focus on, and that's good. But yet there's a whole other waiting room of those of us who have these kind of problems. First, are reticent to admit that we do, because it's who we are and it's what we do. I mean, we don't want to show. That's, again, ego in the way of passion is. There's one thing about passion, having passion for your job and why you join fire, why you join law enforcement, or you join EMS. You want to help people. One of those ways you want to be there. But on the other hand, we're reticent to admit that we're also human. When we don't wear a cape. We have our own kryptonites that we have to deal with, and we don't want to show weakness. And we're afraid that showing weakness, especially any kind of physical weakness, is going to hurt our ability to do our job, not personally on a personal basis, but if the department finds out about it, what are they going to do if they find out of my blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And you can't let that get in the way, because if I don't want to sound like an old commercial, but if you don't have your health, you have nothing. You can't function in that job.
Absolutely. And we've actually created some safe ways in our program for that too, where we have alias options. Like we have, because we also have like, we have chiefs coming to us, deputy chiefs, commanders, that they're like, holy crap, this is me too, where I used to be a good leader and I can't even think anymore. I can't focus. I can't remember what I just read on a document at the start to be able to finish this document. I can't get the paperwork out, like trying to keep track of their team. Their brain doesn't even function that way anymore. The brain fog has hit, which is
Right.
part of cognitive thinking. That is one of the hormones that your stress system manages.
Sure.
And they've got the blood sugars, they're not sleeping. So what we've done as well is they can use an alias name. So it is a group that we have it created as a group where they can actually ask questions, but it's an alias name. So nobody knows who's asking the questions. So anybody, any rank, you could have a whole bunch of guys in the same service and nobody will know.
Nobody will know. That's great.
It's all that. So that was one of the things too, because this is a big part of it. The other thing too is I don't look at this as anything's broken. I look at this as biohacking and being able to really, how can I optimize? How can I get it ahead? Like, what are pro athletes doing? Let me do that. Like, let me treat my body like a pro athlete and go and get all of the trainers and all of the people that they're doing things with and optimize my body so that I can be the top fireman, like, so that I can be top of my game. And everybody's like, hey, what are you doing? And I can be like, oh, this test is going to help you find out this, and this is going to help you find out that. And then you stick to this. And it's really more about biohacking and optimizing your body than it is about really fixing something that's broken, because your bodies are not civilians' bodies.
Right.
And we got to stop treating them that way. And if you even look at biohacking, like I started looking at biohacking when I was like, hey, that's kind of what I do. And it's all, let's regulate your circadian rhythms. Let's go to bed at the same time of night and have this 2-hour routine before bed. And I'm like, who, when they get home at 7 in the morning and is freaking exhausted and has so many family things to do, has time to do a 2-hour before they sleep routine that's not even at the same time day or night, right? So we need to really change the way that biohacking happens for first responders.
All right. Well, all right. So we've talked about symptoms. We've talked about tests that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go to, for our listeners and viewers, two things that we need to stress. And I'm going to put one before the other way it's listed. I think we have to stress first why it is not a responder's fault that they're struggling with these issues: sleep deprivation, exhaustion, short fuse, digestive issues, and are heading towards a burnout, even after they've stopped working shifts or retired. My hands up. Okay. So we need to address that for them. And then finally, we want to talk about how to get your body back to peak performance. Mm-hmm. So that you deal with the effects of the job, but they don't have the same results on your body. So let's talk first. How do we try to lift the stigma of this is not my fault just because I'm a firefighter or a police officer or a paramedic?
Well, the thing is first off is that you're not taught this, right? Like, you're taught all the tactical side. You guys are taught what to do on scene. Everything that you are preparing for is preparing you guys of what to do on scene. Correct. Physically for your bodies, nutritionally, all of that stuff. It's pretty much how to just be in peak performance. You're not treating yourself. You have never ever been taught all of the parts of your stress system. You didn't know. So if somebody doesn't know something, you can't fault them, because It's not like these guys aren't trying. Like, fire guys are always like peak condition. Like, you have to be until your body doesn't let you anymore. And that's where sometimes those things too, the motivation and drive goes. The blood sugars are totally off, that you cannot resist, or gut bacteria, different things can be causing crazy sugar cravings that you have zero willpower to stop yourself from eating. I know with me, I had one of my issues too was blood sugars and was the gut issues too. I would inhale 4 chocolate bars, right? And I was a personal trainer. Like, it just wasn't, it's these things that when we start becoming somebody who we know deep down we are. Like our brain knows we are this active type A personality that goes for goals and stops. But when our brain, our hormones start kicking into the point where the motivation and drive goes down and the exhaustion sits in and we're not sleeping and moods kick in, we start wondering what's wrong with us. And we start going into this almost this reactive mode. But my hope is that now that people are hearing and understanding about their stress system, they can switch into reactive mode and go, okay, now I'm going to be reactive and proactive on this. And I am going to, now that I have the knowledge and I know what to do, now I'm going to put it into action. Because there's actually not something wrong with me. I just didn't have the right tools. And now I'm going to put those tools in my toolbox and go.
Great. All right. So that we've kind of worked to lift the stigma off and let them know that, let us know, I shouldn't say them because it's part of us, that let us know that it's beyond our basic day-to-day knowledge of what's going on inside. We're just doing our job, to coming home, taking care of family, and going back to do a job. And also one of the things we have to point out also is that a lot of people in first responders, to help supplement the income, they'll have their own business or work a second job. So it's not like the 24 on, 48 off, the 24 on at the firehouse, and then they're working 12-hour days at their business or where their second job, come home and still facing all the home stuff. And then after those 48 hours, they're back at the fire station. So they don't even have the time to decompress from what they've been through on their shift duty. So then let's go to, how do we get them back on the path to peak performance again, to be able to be the best that they can be physically?
Yeah. So beyond the testing and the supplements, those are things that, is so independent, but there are some things that are standard across the board for everybody. This one isn't I'll start with this one is, every time you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So when you are saying yes to an extra overtime shift, when you are saying yes to that extra job, you are still saying no to something else. And sometimes it's no to time with your kids. Sometimes it's no to the family that, I actually have a lesson in my program. It's, are you cheating on your spouse? And I still remember this one guy, he's like, holy crap. He goes, I've been cheating on my wife this whole time. I didn't know. And the name of who he was cheating with is the name of his fire truck. He's like, he was feeling guilty. Anytime anyone asked him to take an extra shift, he took it. And he ended up being the person they'd come to first to ask as well, because he was the one that always took that extra shift.
Right.
And he started saying to himself, okay, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? And sometimes it is like, my husband will always message me, okay, they've asked me to take this shift, or this is happening, where do we stand on this? And we have this conversation, the two of us together, about, okay, well, we've got this and this all sorted at home. We'll be fine here. How is your health? How's your sleep been? How are you going to be for this? And we talk it through, and he may take it, he may not. It really depends. So that is a big one that people can start asking themselves is, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? But on a physical standpoint, so the nervous system is my big thing. PTSD hits your nerves. So traumas hit your nerves. So it's really important that we can start strengthening your nervous system. So we have the two branches of the nervous system. We'll talk about your sympathetic, your stress, your vagus nerve portions of your resting nervous system. So your vagus nerve covers your whole body, but around your gut, they're unmyelinated. So that means it's like a rubber wire. It's like a wire without the rubber coating. So you just see that copper wire. So it's very easy to damage, but it's also easy to engage it. So the nerves around your gut are all unmyelinated. They're all really, really easy to trigger, which is why as well, with a lot of PTSD, a lot of stress, burnout, all of these things, we also start getting more gut issues, is because those are the quickest to react of your resting nerve. So a quick, easy way. So you guys do a lot of breathing with your gear on how to be breathing when you're on call. Every time that you breathe, if you're breathing through your nose, there's a branch of your vagus nerve on the left side of your sinus that you'd hit. If you fill your belly up with air, you're engaging those unmyelinated fibers of that nerve. And if you slowly breathe out, you're touching those nerves and you're engaging them. So it's like a workout. Think of it like a bicep curl. Or a pull-up or something. Every time you're doing that, you're actually slowly working that muscle. For the pull-up, it's slowly down that actually gets you a lot of the gains in that pull-up. So when we're working those nerves, every time you breathe. Now, you have trained yourself to be able to breathe, to get yourself into a resting state when you're on fire, on scene. How often do that off scene? Right? So it's about training that breathing out of off scene. So you may not have back-to-back calls where you're working that system. You're also, if you're only training that system when you're on a call, then that's where your memory goes into when it's going to kick in. So your stress system is just like a muscle, or sorry, your nervous system. The more that you work it, the stronger it becomes and the quicker it is to react. So if you're always kicking in for every call into that stress nerve, then your resting nerves gets majorly overpowered. So we're strengthening this resting vagus nerve by doing the breathing. That's the very first thing we start with. We get into all kinds of advanced stuff, but the very, very first thing is start breathing. How many of you breathe through your mouth? Mouth breathing is sympathetic. It's your stress nerve breathing. Nose breathing is your resting. So if you're breathing through your mouth at night when you're sleeping, you're snoring, sleep apnea, that's all telling us you're in your stress nerve the whole time you're sleeping. We need to start training that when you're waking. So anytime you go into your car or go into another room or just continually throughout the day, stop and breathe. If you're only doing it when you're in a stressed state, you're only going to train yourself to be in that resting state when you're in a stressed situation. But training it outside of that in your everyday life, when you're playing a game with your kids, when you're eating dinner, breathe through your nose, fill that belly, and you're starting to train that resting nerve. It's repetitions. Repetitions, repetitions, repetitions. It's not about sitting there and meditating for 2 hours. It's about incorporating it into your 24-hour shift, that as often as you can, breathe through that nose, fill your belly, breathe out through your nose, and start training that resting vagus nerve so that it stops being overpowered by your stress nerve.
It's very insightful. I don't think I've used the concept of nose breathing in teaching my young students. So I train for their bar and bat mitzvah, how to breathe to be able to sing what they're going to sing without burping a lot, because you're up there on the stage and you're reciting and your mouth breathing because you're nervous. And then all of a sudden you go, burp. And I said, you want to avoid that. So take a nice slow breath in through your nose and then let it out. And you're not going to put a lot of that air into the belly itself. That air is going into your lungs, filling them up, which presses down, and the diaphragm will expand, and then you'll be able to use the diaphragm to push out your music as you sing or read your portion. So that I've been doing for 40 years. But what you just said is much more insightful, because I had no idea about how the nerves were connected, both sides, and how that breathing, if we incorporate it daily into our daily routine, can really make a big difference in everything we do, not just trying to sing something without belching during the middle of the prayer or the song. So I really like that. So what else, other than most of these people have that personal drive, if once they have a diagnosis, to get better, they want to do better.
Yeah.
And they'll say, okay, I've done the testing. We found out this, that. I've started, my doctor helped me with this. I've started some of these supplements. How do I get the rest of me into that first gear? Getting back into, I'm sure not first gear, but how do I get back to third gear or fourth gear so I'm really myself again?
The rest of you, meaning the mental side of things, or the rest
The
of
mental
you?
side of things, and just knowing that you're back, and realizing that it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to take one supplement one day and you're back. Hey, I'm back to normal. It's not going to happen. But you have to be patient. So we have to teach them patience. We have to teach them understanding,
Yes.
and that they can do their job. They're going to be able to do it, but they're going to be doing it from a different personal approach. And that approach is going to be different for every single person in your crew. It's not going to be the same, because it worked for Bob, so I'm just going to do what Bob did and it'll work for me. That doesn't happen. So how do we kind of drive them emotionally and mentally towards, yes, that goal line is still there for you, and you can attain it?
So there's different, I know how we do it. I can tell
Okay.
you how we do it.
Yeah,
So
that's fine.
I just don't want to sound salesy, but I'm just like, I don't know how else to answer this without saying how we do it.
No, that's
So
okay. That's
we
fine.
have to, like, I've created the way that I teach you guys. So my background is 27 years of teaching, coaching, mindset, how to do all of that, and as well as all the nervous stuff. So I have a functional practitioner that comes in and does the testing, does the supplements, does all that with you guys to get that part. But we also have an underlying program that 3 to 5 times a week while the guys are on the toilet is usually when they read the emails,
Right.
the lessons. We start going through things. So for 2 weeks, we're teaching them about the breathing that I just spoke of, the basic breathing, right? For 2 weeks, we talk about water, hydration, but electrolytes, getting things in there, how to incorporate it in your day, how to use it in a crisis, how to use it in different aspects of the job. So there's so many different things that these guys may not have thought of, that we start giving them all of these tools that they use in their daily life, in their life as just a first responder life, because our life is so different, plan Bs, doing things with your family, ways to incorporate, like, so 5 love languages is one of our 2-week lessons, which my husband was like, you have to put this in there, because it's been the biggest thing for our family, of teaching my husband how to fill our kids' love buckets as fast as he can when he gets home, with knowing how to do it. And he fills up, like, one of my kids is quality time, the other one is touch, and he knows he needs to fill both of their buckets when he gets home, and then he gets time for himself. The kids are happy. It's given him direction on how to figure out how to stay connected with our kids around all the shifts, and how to feel like being a better parent. So we've brought in all of these aspects through it, from our life experience, from my training, nutrition experience, teaching them when to work out, when not to work out, understanding how to do that. We get into that with heart rate variability. We get into advanced training with vagus nerve training, so that becomes less of a factor, how to bring that in on the job, how to actually eat on the job in different scenarios when you have really long calls and you can't get to food, how to prepare, what to do for all those things. There's so many different factors in life. So what we've done is incorporated all of those things that have worked for my husband and I, that have worked for us. As I'm going through the program and I'm like, ooh, this is where a bunch of people are struggling, I create a whole other lesson or module for it, on it, to teach them how to manage that. Not booking appointments the day after your shift ends. So technically day 1 of your day off, but you ended up home at 7 a.m. You don't book appointments on that day. Like, simple things of life to get in those
It is.
tools.
Never thought of it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these things we go, so they get more and more tools of how to truly understand how to work all of these healthy habits in their life as they're going through understanding the supplementation. And then as we're going through that, I've interviewed a whole bunch of people, like EMDR. If people are looking, Dr. Trevor Wilkins, he's the Viking therapist. You can find him on Facebook, YouTube. Phenomenal for EMDR. He is a former traffic homicide police detective that through his PTSD journey ended up becoming a therapist that deals with childhood trauma and EMDR. So
Let's define EMDR for our listeners and viewers, please.
Okay, so EMDR this is the way Trevor has taught us. And I have a video. If anybody goes to my YouTube page, which is on my website, to the YouTube links and to interviews, you will find his interview there. And so he explains it in that when something happens that we didn't have a file for in our brain, it sits in limbo. Normally there's files all over in our brain. We have one, it goes in, we're good. It could be something where a tragic thing happens with your child. It could be something where you're like, we had a guy, we were going through everything, as I said earlier, where we were checking all of his symptoms. And I'm like, when did all this happen? I'm like, okay, you told me that your dog passed away just 6 months before that. He's like, oh my gosh. It was his dog passing because his dog is what got him through everything. Every trauma, his dog got him through. So it was actually, he didn't have a file in his brain for his dog passing. So it doesn't have to be the trauma calls, and it can be the trauma calls. So all of these ones, if you don't have a file in your brain, they just go into limbo and they're floating around there and they come out at crazy times. They stress your body. Your brain is never able to relax and process it. So EMDR isn't your traditional talk therapy. It is eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I remember what it is.
Where you're watching a light and they're talking you through certain things, tastes, smells, you may not even know. So when Trevor does it, he says that there's guys who know that there's certain calls that have added up, but they don't even have thoughts of those calls, but they know the feelings they bring on. So if they can say, okay, this is making me anxious. When I'm doing this, I get anxious and this happens. So he helps you find a file in the brain, even for calls that you may not even know are still affecting you. Well, you know they're affecting you, but you don't know which calls. You can't say, well, it was this one at this house that this happened. So EMDR is great for that. He talks about in that video as well how to find an EMDR therapist near you, because this does have to be done in person. It should not be done online, especially with traumas. It's very, very, very successful and helpful for PTSD. It is something as well that I teach my guys from a proactive one to maybe go, like, a lot of your insurances cover this as well. A lot of your EPAs, EAPs, your employee assistance programs, cover therapy, and they do cover EMDR, but always making sure that they are trained in military and or first responders, so that they truly understand the traumas you go to. If not, it will
very
probably
important. Yeah, we've talked about that many times.
Yes. So Trevor goes through all of that in the training as well, more in depth. But it's really phenomenal to really help find files for things that you didn't. So we start talking to our guys earlier on when they start working with us about, hey, even if you don't feel something's bugging you, go once a month. And because there's business people that use EMDR for what they call business traumas, right? Where they had to let somebody go, or like deadlines were stressing them out, or they had a horrible employee. So and they do that in order to keep themselves top of their game. There's professional athletes that do it to keep on top of their game. So if there's, as a first responder, going to this on a monthly or every 2-3 months basis, where you actually have your appointments booked out for the year and you go on a regular basis, you are proactively preventing these traumas from piling up and becoming something that is festering and causes more health issues in your body.
That's great. And folks, again, we're going to stress that this is all available to you online at 911lifestyle.com. And that from there, Andi will guide, Andi and her team will guide you, no matter where you're located, to help you follow this program. And so, you don't have to be in Toronto. You don't have to be in Canada. You can be in the US. You can be anywhere. And thanks to the internet, you can go to this website and start a journey there to heal. Whether it could be healing emotionally, could be healing physically, could be a combination of both. But you know you want to do this job. That's why we're here in the first place. And so, and you want to do it to the best of your ability. And that's what 99.9% of us want to do. Because the job doesn't choose us. We choose this job. There are people who love to do different things. And those of us in first responder or public safety are dedicated to helping people. That's what it's all about. We want to help people. And it takes a toll on us. And if you don't think it has, then either it's too much bravado, too much testosterone, and not seeing reality as it really is. Because you can't be in this job volunteer, career, wildland, part pay. You can't be in this job for more than a year without having some sort of reaction to what you see on the job. If you do, then you're not human. You're a robot, because, you know, we don't have to, it's not that you're emotional. Some of us do wear our emotions on our sleeves. And if you've listened to the show long enough, you know that I'm one of them. Sometimes in my editorials, I get a little emotional. But the fact is that emotions play a major part in our lives. We love our family. We love our kids. We love our parents. We love our cousins and siblings. That's emotion. We love the job that we do most of the time. But damn it can be frustrating sometimes. You know, we weren't able to make a grab. That's probably between not being able to make a grab and you're on a medical call and you're doing CPR and you can't make them viable again. Those are two of probably the most stressful things that we go through. And I can tell you with all honesty, I've been there multiple times, even in only my 8 years, multiple times. And it eats away at you and you remember it. And as I said earlier, you know, this friend of mine, we have a bunch of calls, really traumatic calls that we were on together. And we still talk about them. They don't push us in a bad direction, but since we were on the calls together, we can talk about it together. And that's the catharsis. That's how we relieve it. And it doesn't disappear, but it's no longer at the front of our minds, eating away at our day-to-day lives. And I think everything you've shared with us today, Andi, both the physiological and the emotional and mental aspects, are something that I've never heard before in doing this podcast and reading the trades for years, but I've never seen this approach. And I thank you and your team for reaching out to me and, you know, asking to be a guest, because it's just so important what we've discussed. Yeah. So I'm just urging you, if you're watching or listening, visit. First of all, be fair to yourself. As you've heard me say before, look in the mirror, because that person in the mirror knows every one of your secrets. You can't tell it a lie because it knows every truth about you. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, am I the whole person I was before I started this job? Am I the me that I was? Or is the job chipping away at me? And if it is, and it probably will, because that's what we do, this is a place to go. 911lifestyle.com. And at least research what Andi has on the website, what she and the team can do for you. I'm telling you, I'll probably avail myself of it, because we talked in between the break, and I'm probably going to avail myself of it myself. And I'll keep it in the blog. I'll mention it in the blog and keep you posted. But I think that if you're a regular listener or viewer, you know how much emphasis we put on the overall health of first responders. Not just your physical health, but your behavioral, mental health, how you think, how you act on the job and off the job. And we've discussed that. We've had lots of people on there to discuss that. This is just the first one that I see encompass the whole picture, the whole part of it, the whole pie, so to speak. And I really do urge you. And you know that on the homepage we have, if you have a problem, we give you the number to text the word badge and there's people on that other side of that text who are willing to talk with you and meet with you anonymously online or through text or telephone to help you out. Well, if you can do that, then you can reach out to a website, 911lifestyle.com, and see what that has to offer you and see what they can possibly do to work with you, no matter where you are, to guide you on a different path to get you back to the me that you loved, that you once loved, and bring you back to your family and make you a better professional first responder. I can't thank you enough. I really didn't know what to expect. And this was so informative, Andi, and covers so much of, as you're talking, I'm thinking back to my 8 years. I'm seeing so much of what we're talking about happening then. Most of it was before I had a family, besides my wife. We didn't have kids yet until the last couple of years I was in. But I can see so much of what went on back then as affecting who I was. Yeah. And it's eye-opening. It is. And I really hope that my brothers and sisters will do this. They'll come and visit. They'll have to be honest, though. You have to be honest with yourself. And that person in the mirror is the one to speak with, not your spouse, not your parents. You go and stand in front of that mirror and try to tell that person in there or ask them, are you fine? Are you okay? Are you 100% you? You might be surprised what that person in the mirror is going to reply is going to be. So this has been fantastic. I would very much like to bring you back in season 6 at some point to do a follow-up, because I just think that we have an obligation. We need to continue this education with our viewers and listeners. So we'll talk off air through email and social media, and we'll set something up again in a few months, because this has just blown me away, to be very honest. The information, not just for me, because it affects me personally, but because there's so much more information available to it.
Yeah.
That you opened our eyes to.
It's been a long road. For me, I struggled for 20 years in between my burnout crashes, and I swore when I got better that I would not let anybody go through what I went through. And then I discovered that my husband's colleagues were struggling, and the stories I hear day in and day out. There's no way when I was in my peak of my burnout that I would have been able to stay safe on the job and keep my crew around me safe as well. So if I can have any part to do, and if it's just giving you information and understanding that so that you can go somewhere else and get the help that you need, if it's not through me, it doesn't matter, as long as the information gets you on the track to understanding that there is not something wrong with you, that your body does require more than a civilian's. And we need to start taking action on that and optimizing you so that you can perform on the job and you can be the parent and spouse that you also want to be at home.
That's great. That's great. All right. Well, Andi, again, our sincere thanks for your time and everything you've done and the background information you've brought. And we're going to make sure that we stay in touch and do this. This has really been a very informative podcast. And this is really the kind that I love. And this is what I want to do when I started this thing, is to really reach out to my brothers and sisters in the fire service, law enforcement, EMS, and everybody involved in public safety to help us all do a better be better people, do our jobs to the very best of our ability, and then be able to still share the rest of our life with our families and loved ones.
Yes.
And even be able, and this is going to be great. So I really thank you. Folks, thank you for tuning in and watching. If you're watching the video, this will conclude the show. If you're listening to the audio podcast, we're going to be right back with more right after these words. Again, my thanks to Andi Clark for all the information she shared today. We're going to have her back in season 6, and we'll follow up. And, if you want to share your experience anonymously, you can write to us at info@5-alarmtaskforcecorp.org, and we'll be happy to delete your name, or you don't even have to put it in when you sign it, and we'll be happy to share that with Andi, and the next time she's on, and share some of your thoughts and expressions from listening to this and what you've done with it when she comes back. So you can always do that for us. And that's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We always appreciate it. It means a lot to us. We have a few more podcasts coming up in the month of June, and then we'll be taking that summer break and be back in mid-August with our 6th season. Hard to believe it's sixth season already. So thanks for tuning in. Stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye now.